The ballroom of the Grand Royal Hotel was glowing that evening. Crystal chandeliers hung above the tables, throwing golden light over the guests in their glittering clothes. Waiters in black uniforms moved quietly, balancing trays of drinks while the sound of soft jazz floated through the air. Everything about that place spoke of luxury and grace. The tables were covered with white linen, the air filled with the scent of roses and fine perfume. It was the kind of night that looked perfect from the outside. Among the guests was the city's elite, politicians, artists, business leaders, and celebrities who smiled politely at each other, while secretly measuring who looked better or richer. Cameras flashed occasionally, and laughter echoed near the stage where a beautiful grand piano stood waiting. Everyone was there for a charity dinner organized by one of the city's most powerful families. And in the middle of all that shine and laughter, a young waitress moved quietly between the tables holding a silver tray. She kept her eyes low and her smile soft, making sure to avoid bumping into anyone. No one noticed her, though she noticed everything. The sparkle of the jewelry, the smell of expensive perfume, the way people's laughter often sounded rehearsed. Her name was Lena. She had been working at the hotel for almost a year, mostly on evening shifts. She liked the job because it allowed her to watch different kinds of people, some kind, some proud, some lonely. But what she liked most was the piano in the corner of the ballroom. Every night she would pass by it, pretending not to look, but her heart would always pause for a moment. That piano reminded her of a dream she once had, a dream she quietly buried years ago. Lena had loved music since she was a child. Her mother used to say she was born with music in her fingers. Her family wasn't rich, but when she was small, her mother found an old second-hand keyboard from a neighbor and brought it home. Lena spent hours every evening learning songs by ear, sometimes playing until midnight. When she turned 12, she began taking free music lessons at a nearby community center. Her teacher had said she had a rare gift, that the way she played wasn't just about skill, it was about emotion. But life doesn't always go the way we dream. Her father passed away when she was 16 and her mother fell ill soon after. Lena had to leave school to work part-time jobs to support her mother and her younger brother. The piano lessons stopped. The keyboard was sold to pay bills. Years went by, and the sound of music slowly faded from her home. Now she worked at one of the city's fanciest hotels, wearing a uniform that made her look just like everyone else on the staff. Invisible. Every night she walked past that grand piano, remembering the feeling of keys beneath her fingertips. Sometimes when the ballroom was empty and the cleaning crew was working late, she would sit for just a minute on the piano bench, running her fingers softly across the keys without pressing them. She never dared to play a note, afraid someone might hear her and scold her for touching what wasn't hers. That evening was busier than usual. The hotel was hosting a major charity gala, the kind that would be written about in magazines. Guests filled the ballroom, and the music from the pianist on stage blended perfectly with the clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversation. Lena moved quickly from table to table, offering drinks and smiling politely, though her feet ached and her tray felt heavier with every round. Near the center of the room sat a group of famous people, actors, politicians, a well-known singer, and a wealthy businesswoman who sponsored the event. They laughed loudly, their jewelry catching the light while the pianist in the corner played softly, his hands dancing gracefully over the keys. The music made everything feel smooth and elegant. As Lena passed by the piano, she slowed her pace for a second. She didn't mean to, but the melody caught her attention. It was a song she used to play years ago. Her chest tightened with memory. The pianist played beautifully, but she could feel something missing. Something emotional, something real. Still, she smiled faintly and moved on, whispering a quiet, "Excuse me," as she served a table near the window. Hours went by. The ballroom was alive with conversation, laughter, and the sweet hum of the orchestra. Lena felt tired but didn't complain. She loved watching people, how they moved, how they smiled when someone important passed by. She often wondered what it would feel like to belong to that world, to sit among them instead of serving them. When the pianist paused for a break, the music faded, replaced by the sound of chatter. The guests turned their attention toward the stage where the host was preparing to speak. Lena walked toward the back of the room, balancing an empty tray, when she overheard two staff members whispering near the service door. "The pianist isn't feeling well," one said. "He's leaving early." "What?" "But the second set starts in 15 minutes. The other replied, panic in his voice. "The manager's going to lose it." Lena froze. The pianist was leaving? She glanced toward the stage. The man who had been playing earlier was indeed packing his sheet music, coughing slightly. The manager looked worried, pacing near the bar, checking his watch. A few of the guests were already looking at the empty piano, wondering what was going on. A strange feeling came over Lena. Her heart started beating faster, though she didn't know why. She felt something stir inside her, a quiet voice she hadn't heard in years. It said, "You could play." She quickly brushed the thought aside. That was ridiculous. She hadn't touched a piano properly in years, and even if she could still play, who would allow a waitress to perform in front of these guests? The idea itself felt crazy, yet she couldn't stop thinking about it. The manager was now talking to the event organizer, his tone nervous. "I'm trying to find a replacement," he said. "But on such short notice, it's impossible." The organizer frowned. "The guests expect music. It's part of the program. Do something, anything." Lena stood behind the curtain separating the service area from the ballroom, clutching her tray. Her palms were sweating. She could almost hear the silence that would fill the hall if no one played. Her eyes moved toward the piano again, shining under the soft light, waiting for someone to touch it. Without realizing it, she took a small step forward, then another. She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Don't be foolish," she whispered. "It's not your place," but her heart kept arguing. What if it is? She watched the manager rubbing his forehead, clearly out of options. She knew that if she didn't do something, the evening might turn into an awkward disaster, and for some reason she couldn't bear that thought, not because of the guests, but because she knew what that piano meant. It wasn't just a piece of furniture to her. It was the one thing that had ever made her feel alive. Finally, taking a deep breath, Lena walked toward the manager. "Sir?" she said softly. He turned, looking surprised to see a waitress addressing him. "Yes, what is it?" "I heard the pianist isn't well," she said carefully. "If you need someone to play, I could try, just for a little while until a replacement arrives." The manager blinked as if he hadn't heard her right. "You?" he asked, almost laughing. "You can play?" "I used to," she said quietly. "I've played for years. I can manage a few songs, at least until someone else comes." He looked around, clearly unsure. The event organizer was already approaching again, his face tight with stress. "Do you have a pianist yet?" he demanded. The manager hesitated, then looked at Lena. "She says she can play," he said slowly. The organizer raised his eyebrows. "The waitress?" "Yes," the manager said. "Just for now. It's either that or silence." The organizer sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine," he said finally. "Let her play something soft. If it doesn't work, we'll stop it immediately." Lena nodded, feeling her heart jump into her throat. She wiped her hands on her apron, trying to calm herself. Her legs felt weak as she walked toward the piano. The guests noticed her now, whispering among themselves. A few laughed quietly, assuming it was some kind of joke. The piano looked even grander up close. Its polished black surface reflected the lights of the chandelier. Lena stood before it, staring at the keys that once felt like a second language to her. Her fingers trembled slightly. For a moment she thought about turning back. But then she remembered her mother's words from years ago. If music lives in your heart, it never truly leaves. She took a seat, her back straight, and closed her eyes for a brief moment. The noise of the room faded, and all she could hear was her heartbeat. Then she took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The first sound that came out was soft, hesitant, like a whisper. The crowd went silent. She played a few notes, a simple melody she remembered from her childhood, and slowly the music began to grow. Her fingers started to move with more confidence, the sound filling the hall. People who had been talking turned their heads. The laughter stopped. The waiters froze mid-step. No one expected what they were hearing. The notes floated through the air, clear and warm, touching something inside everyone present. Lena forgot where she was. She forgot about her uniform, her aching feet, and the people staring at her. For the first time in years, she felt free, as if every piece of her life, all the pain and loss, was flowing out through her hands into the piano. And though she didn't know it yet, that single moment, the quiet waitress daring to play before an elite crowd, would change her life forever. The first few seconds after Lena began to play felt like forever. The sound of the piano filled the air softly at first, like the quiet touch of rain on glass. People who had been talking stopped mid-sentence, confused at the sight of a waitress sitting at the grand piano. For a moment there was disbelief, but then the music started to grow, delicate at first, then steady and sure. Lena's fingers moved gently, then faster, her hands remembering what her heart had never forgotten. She played a song that once lived deep inside her, one she used to play for her mother on quiet nights when the world outside their small apartment seemed too hard. The melody rose and fell like a story without words. Each note carried a piece of her past, each pause a quiet breath of hope. The guests didn't know what to make of it at first. A few of them whispered to each other, wondering if this was part of the evening's program. The elegant woman in the front row frowned, adjusting her diamond bracelet as if trying to understand what was happening. The host stood awkwardly near the stage, unsure if he should stop her. But then something shifted. The music wrapped around the room like a warm wind, soft and full of feeling, and the restless energy began to fade. People who had been glancing at their phones slowly put them down. Glasses stopped clinking. For the first time that night, everyone was silent, not because they were told to be, but because they wanted to be. Lena could feel their eyes on her, but strangely it didn't make her nervous. She wasn't thinking about the crowd, the fancy clothes, or the whispers. She was thinking about home, about her mother's gentle smile and the way her little brother used to fall asleep beside the old keyboard. Her fingers moved with memory, not fear. Every sound she created came straight from her heart. When the song ended, the silence that followed was deep. For a moment, no one clapped. It was as if the entire room needed a second to return from wherever the music had taken them. Then slowly applause began. It started from one table, soft, hesitant, and then spread until the whole room was clapping. Lena looked up, surprised. The sight almost didn't feel real. People smiling, nodding, even cheering a little. Her face turned red. She stood up quickly, unsure what to do, but before she could leave, someone from the back called out, "Play another one." A few others joined in, and soon, everyone was asking for more. The manager, who had been standing near the bar the whole time, finally exhaled a long breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He smiled nervously and gave her a small nod, permission to continue. Lena sat again, her heart beating fast, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was excitement, something she hadn't felt in years. She placed her fingers on the keys and began another song, something lighter, gentler, with small bursts of joy hidden in every chord. The music danced through the air. Couples at the tables turned to look at each other, smiling. The host, who had been so tense earlier, relaxed, leaning against the wall, listening. The woman in the front row, the one with the diamond bracelet, wiped her eyes quietly. It was strange how everything changed. Only minutes earlier, Lena was invisible. No one had noticed her carrying trays or refilling glasses. But now all eyes were on her, not because of her uniform or her job, but because of her gift. The music made people forget who she was. For those few minutes, she wasn't a waitress. She was an artist. As the second song ended, the applause was louder, warmer. People looked around, amazed. Some even stood up to see her better. The event's photographer began taking pictures, realizing that something special was happening. From across the room, a man in a dark suit watched her closely. He was older, with silver hair and a calm expression. He had been sitting quietly the entire evening, listening more than talking. When she started playing, his eyes had widened, and now they stayed fixed on her. There was something thoughtful in his gaze, as if he recognized something in her music that others couldn't name. After the third song, Lena stood up, smiling nervously, unsure if she should continue. The applause filled the hall once more, and she could see faces glowing with admiration. It was the kind of attention she had never known. When she returned to the service area, her co-workers looked at her in disbelief. One of the waiters whispered, "I didn't know you could play like that," Lena blushed. "I didn't know I still could," she said softly. The manager walked up to her, his tone no longer sharp or impatient. "That was incredible," he said. "You saved the evening," she smiled shyly. "I just wanted to help." "Help?" he said, shaking his head in amazement. "You didn't just help. You turned a disaster into a miracle." Before she could respond, the organizer of the event approached. He was a tall man with an elegant voice. "Miss," he said, "that was beautiful. Our guests are still talking about it. Would you be willing to play again later? After dinner?" Lena hesitated. "If you need me to, sir," he smiled. "We'd be honored." For the rest of the evening, she returned to her usual duties, serving drinks, clearing tables. But now people looked at her differently. Guests thanked her. Some even stopped to say how moved they were by her playing. One older woman said it reminded her of her late husband, who used to play piano too. Another said she hadn't felt that kind of peace in years. Lena didn't know what to say to them. She only smiled and nodded, feeling both shy and grateful. It was strange to be noticed for something other than her work uniform. Later that night, when dinner was nearly over, she was asked to play again. This time she didn't feel nervous. She walked calmly to the piano, sat down, and began a soft melody that filled the room like the gentle glow of candlelight. Outside the ballroom windows, the city lights flickered in the dark. Inside, time seemed to slow down. Some guests closed their eyes. Others leaned back in their chairs, letting the sound wash over them. Even the hotel staff paused for a moment, listening from the corners of the room. The man with the silver hair watched from his seat, still and thoughtful. When she finished, he was the first to stand and clap, and soon the entire room followed. The applause was louder this time, not just polite but heartfelt. As Lena stood and bowed slightly, she saw the manager giving her a proud smile from the back of the room. She smiled back, though her heart felt heavy with emotion she couldn't quite explain. When the night finally ended and the guests began leaving, several people came to thank her again. The elegant woman with the diamonds took her hand gently and said, "You reminded me that true beauty isn't in what we wear or own, but in what we feel. Thank you." Lena nodded, unable to find words. She had only wanted to fill an empty moment, but somehow she had touched something deeper in everyone there. After the ballroom emptied, she helped her coworkers clean up. The grand piano stood quiet again, shining under the dim lights. She walked past it slowly, her reflection glimmering faintly on its surface. She ran her hand softly over the lid, whispering a quiet thank you under her breath. As she gathered her things in the staff room, the manager appeared again. "You should go home," he said kindly. "You've done enough for one night," she smiled. "Thank you, and thank you for letting me play," he nodded. "No, thank you. You reminded everyone, including me, that talent can come from anywhere." She left the hotel that night feeling lighter than she had in years. The cool air brushed her face as she stepped into the quiet street. She could still hear the echo of the piano in her head. It was like carrying a secret flame, small but bright. When she reached her tiny apartment, she found her younger brother asleep on the couch, the TV still playing softly. She turned it off, covered him with a blanket, and sat by the window. Outside, the city was peaceful. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had served tables all night, the same hands that had brought music back to life. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream again. She thought about her mother, about the old keyboard that started it all. Maybe tomorrow she would find another piano somewhere. Maybe she would start practicing again. Not for fame, not for anyone's approval, just for herself. As she closed her eyes, she could still see the faces of the people in that ballroom, the way they listened, the way their expressions softened. It wasn't just the music that changed them, it was the truth behind it. The idea that beauty and grace could come from anywhere, even from someone who spent her nights carrying trays. Lena drifted to sleep with a quiet smile, not knowing that her story was only beginning. Somewhere across the city, the man with the silver hair sat in his study, still thinking about her performance. On his desk lay his business card. He turned it over thoughtfully, then placed it beside his phone, already planning what he would do the next day. Because sometimes a single moment of courage can open doors that were once invisible. And that night, the waitress who dared to play had unknowingly opened one, not just for herself, but for everyone who still believed that dreams, no matter how buried, can find their way back to life. The next morning came quietly. The sun peeked through the thin curtains of Lena's small apartment, drawing soft lines of light across the walls. She woke up slowly, still feeling the strange excitement from the night before. For a few seconds, she lay still, wondering if everything that had happened was just a dream. But when she saw her uniform hanging over the chair and the faint ache in her fingers, she knew it was real. Her younger brother was already up, sitting at the small kitchen table, eating toast. He looked up as she entered. "You came home late," he said sleepily. "Yeah," Lena said, pouring herself a cup of tea. "The event ran longer than usual." He shrugged. "You look happy," he said, studying her face. Lena smiled a little. "Maybe I am." She didn't tell him everything right away. How could she explain what it felt like, sitting at that grand piano in front of all those people, playing like her heart had waited years to be heard? It wasn't just about the applause. It was about remembering who she really was beneath the uniform and the tired hands. After breakfast, she left for her next shift. The city was already busy, the noise of cars mixing with the chatter of people heading to work. As she walked, she thought about the man with silver hair who had been watching her during the performance. She had noticed his eyes, calm, focused, almost emotional, though she didn't know who he was. Maybe he was just another guest who liked music. Maybe she'd never see him again. When she reached the hotel, the staff was already talking about her. "There she is," one of the waiters said as she walked in. "Our new star pianist." Everyone laughed softly, but it wasn't teasing. It was admiration. Even the kitchen staff, who usually never noticed much beyond their busy work, smiled at her as she passed. The manager came out from his office, calling her over. He looked different today, less stressed, more cheerful. "Lena," he said, "good to see you. I wanted to thank you again for last night. The guests couldn't stop talking about you." She blushed slightly. "I'm glad it helped, sir." "Helped?" he said, smiling. "It saved us. The hotel's reputation would have suffered if the music had stopped. Instead, everyone's praising the evening as one of the most beautiful events they've attended. You were the highlight." Lena didn't know what to say. Compliments weren't something she was used to hearing. The manager leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Actually, someone left a message for you." "For me?" she asked, surprised. He nodded, handing her a folded piece of paper. "It came early this morning. One of the guests asked the reception desk to make sure you received it." She opened it carefully. The note was written neatly in dark ink. "Your performance last night was extraordinary. Your music spoke to everyone in that room. I'd like to meet you for a short conversation if you're willing. I'll be in the hotel cafe at 4 p.m. today." It was signed with just a name, Mr. Caldwell. Lena frowned slightly. The name didn't sound familiar, but something about it felt formal, important. She wasn't sure if she should go. Maybe he was just another guest being polite, or maybe he wanted to offer something she couldn't imagine. The rest of the day moved slowly. She worked her usual shifts, but her mind kept drifting back to that note. Every time she passed the cafe, she wondered what kind of person she was supposed to meet. She even considered not going at all. After all, she wasn't used to meeting people like that. By the time the clock reached 4, curiosity had won over hesitation. She took off her apron, fixed her hair, and walked to the cafe. The smell of coffee filled the air, and sunlight streamed through the glass windows. Near the corner sat a man in a dark gray suit with silver hair, the same man who had watched her play the night before. He stood up when he saw her, smiling warmly. "Miss Lena," he said. "Yes, that's me," she replied quietly. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit." They shook hands. His grip was gentle but firm. "I'm Richard Caldwell," he said. "I attended the charity event last night." "I remember seeing you," she said honestly. "I must say," he continued, "you gave one of the most moving performances I've witnessed in years. Everyone was speaking about it, but I was deeply touched." Lena blushed. "Thank you, sir. I wasn't planning to perform at all. It just happened." He smiled. "Sometimes the best things do." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence. He took a sip of his coffee, studying her thoughtfully. "Do you play often?" he asked. "Not anymore," she said. "I used to when I was younger, but life got busy. I had to take care of my family, so I stopped." "That's unfortunate," he said softly. Because you have something rare, not just skill, but feeling. You don't play notes, you tell stories. Lena looked down, unsure how to respond. Compliments from strangers made her shy, especially from someone like him who spoke with calm confidence. He continued, I run a small foundation that supports young artists, musicians, painters, writers. We help them get training, exposure, and opportunities. I think you might be someone we could help. She stared at him, speechless. Me? Yes, he said simply. If you're willing, I'd like to hear more of your music. Perhaps we could arrange a proper audition. No pressure and only if you wish. Her heart raced. An opportunity like that sounded unreal. But then doubt crept in. I'm not sure I'm ready, she said quietly. It's been so long. I don't even have my own piano. That's not a problem, he said kindly. We have instruments. What matters is your spirit, and you've already shown that. He slid a small card across the table. Here's my number. Think about it. Call me when you're ready, even if it takes time. Lena held the card carefully, as if it might disappear. Thank you, she said. I'll think about it. He nodded, smiling. Good, just promise me one thing. Don't let fear stop you again. When he left, she sat there for a while, staring at the card. Part of her wanted to believe this could be something big, but another part warned her not to hope too much. Still, hope had already started to bloom quietly inside her, fragile but alive. That evening, after her shift ended, she took a long walk by the river. The city lights reflected on the water like broken stars. She held the card tightly in her hand, thinking about everything. The past, her mother, the sound of the piano, and now this stranger offering her a chance to start again. The next few days passed slowly. She went to work as usual, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she saw the piano in the ballroom, her heart ached a little. One night, after most of the staff had gone home, she stayed behind to clean up. The room was empty, quiet. She looked around. No one in sight. The grand piano sat there, waiting. She hesitated, then walked over, sitting gently on the bench. Her fingers touched the keys, and she began to play softly. It wasn't a performance this time, just her and the music, alone. She played a song she had written years ago when her father was still alive. It was slow, full of love and sadness. Halfway through, she felt someone behind her. She turned quickly, startled. It was the manager, standing near the door, smiling. Don't stop, he said. It's beautiful, she laughed nervously. I didn't think anyone was here. I came to check the lights, he said, but I'm glad I didn't miss this. He walked closer. You know, he added, Mr. Caldwell came by again today. He left a message for you. Her heart skipped. He did? Yes. He said his foundation is holding a small private audition next week. He wants you there. No pressure, but he said it would mean a lot if you came. Lena didn't know what to say. She looked down at the keys, her fingers trembling slightly. The manager smiled. You should go. You deserve it. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the offer. Part of her was terrified. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed? But another part of her whispered that she couldn't ignore this chance. When morning came, she made her decision. She called the number on the card. Mr. Caldwell's assistant answered politely and confirmed the details. The audition would be in a small music hall downtown. She didn't need to bring anything except herself. The following week felt endless. Every free moment she practiced on the hotel piano after hours. Her coworkers cheered her on, leaving the lights on late so she could play. Sometimes they clapped, softly from the doorway, pretending to be her audience. She rediscovered her rhythm. Her fingers grew faster, stronger, more confident. The music came back like an old friend who had been waiting patiently for her return. Finally, the day arrived. She wore a simple dress, nothing fancy, but neat and elegant. As she stood outside the music hall, her hand shook a little. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The hall was quiet except for the sound of footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. At the center stood another grand piano, shining under a soft spotlight. Mr. Caldwell was there, sitting among a few others, perhaps musicians, perhaps judges. He smiled as she entered. "Welcome, Lena. Take your time." She sat at the piano, closed her eyes and let everything fade away, her worries, her past, her doubts. She began to play. The melody that came out was pure and honest, like a confession. She played not for approval, but for freedom. Each note carried her story, the long nights at the hotel, the loss, the hope, the courage to dream again. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then soft applause. Mr. Caldwell stood, his eyes warm with emotion. "You have something rare," he said. "I would like to help you record this music, properly. If you agree, we'll begin soon." Lena couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her throat tightened and for a moment she couldn't speak. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what to say." "Just keep playing," he said kindly. "The world needs to hear you." That evening, as she walked home, the city felt different. The light seemed brighter, the air softer. She smiled to herself, realizing that her life was slowly changing, not through luck, but through courage. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of something far greater than she had ever imagined. The hall was so silent that even the faint hum of the ceiling lights could be heard. Every pair of eyes was locked on the young waitress sitting at the grand piano. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, but her expression had changed. The nervous girl who once stood hesitantly beside the hotel manager was gone. In her place sat someone who seemed to belong there all along, calm, focused, and lost in the music. The melody filled the room again, flowing like a stream finding its way through stones. It wasn't just sound, it carried emotion, weight, and something unspoken that everyone could feel but couldn't explain. The notes rose softly, then fell, like waves breathing in and out. The audience, who moments ago had been whispering about their expensive wines and business ventures, now sat frozen. Every movement, every thought in the room had surrendered to her music. An older man at one of the front tables slowly lowered his glass of champagne. He had seen countless performances in his life, from famous pianists and world-class orchestras. But there was something different here. This wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about skill. It was raw, real, almost painful, and that was what made it beautiful. He leaned back in his chair, his lips parted slightly as if afraid even his breath might disturb the sound. In another corner, a woman in a silver gown clasped her hands together. Her eyes glistened under the dim light. The melody reminded her of something from her own past, a love she had lost, a dream she had buried. The music seemed to speak directly to her, and she couldn't look away. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears, but they rolled down anyway. The young waitress played as if she wasn't in that ballroom anymore. Her mind drifted far away, to the small house where she grew up, where an old upright piano had stood by the window. She remembered her mother humming softly while cooking dinner, and her father sitting beside her, tapping his fingers along the rhythm of her playing. She remembered those evenings when music filled the house, when life felt simple and kind. Her fingers moved faster now, her back straight, her breathing steady. Each note told a story of a dream she once chased and the long road that made her forget it. The music turned delicate again, like a whisper. Every rise and fall felt like a confession. She didn't think about impressing anyone. She was simply speaking the only way she truly knew how. One of the hotel servers had stopped in the doorway, a tray still in his hand, his mouth slightly open. He had worked alongside her for months, maybe even a year, yet he had never seen this side of her. He couldn't believe that the same girl who quietly picked up empty glasses every night was now commanding an entire hall filled with people who usually didn't notice workers like them. He smiled faintly, pride shining in his eyes, and stayed there watching, completely forgetting about the tray he was supposed to deliver. The hotel manager stood near the back wall, his hands folded tightly in front of him. When she had first offered to play, he had hesitated, unsure if letting a waitress touch that piano in front of such a high-profile audience would cost him his job. Now as he listened, he couldn't move. His heart thumped hard in his chest and his throat tightened. He realized she wasn't just saving him from embarrassment, she was saving the night. The music continued to swell, wrapping the room in a warm, invisible embrace. The chandelier lights seemed to soften, flickering like candle flames. People forgot about their expensive outfits and polished shoes. All that remained was the sound, the gentle rhythm of a soul speaking out loud. There was something in her music that stripped away pride and status, leaving only the human heart exposed. Halfway through, she closed her eyes. Her fingers still moved flawlessly, as if guided by something greater than memory. The song shifted, growing more passionate, more alive. Every chord struck deeper, and the air itself seemed to vibrate. The audience could feel her pain and her hope, her struggles and her quiet courage. It wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a story told without words. In the front row, a young man who worked for a local magazine found himself leaning forward, completely captivated. He had covered hundreds of events like this one, and they all felt the same. Polished, rehearsed, predictable. But this moment was different. He reached for his phone and began recording, his hand shaking slightly, knowing that what he was witnessing was something special, something people would talk about long after the night was over. The song began to slow again, the intensity melting into tenderness. Her fingers pressed the keys gently now, each sound fading like a sigh. The audience remained utterly still, almost afraid that moving would break the spell. It was as though time itself had paused inside that grand hall. The only thing alive was the music, weaving its way through every corner of the room. A woman sitting near the bar wiped her cheeks and whispered to her friend, "She's not just playing, she's remembering." Her friend nodded silently, unable to speak. They weren't the only ones feeling that way. Even those who didn't understand classical music could sense it. The honesty, the emotion, the connection that needed no explanation. As the final movement approached, the music grew stronger again. It rose and swelled like a storm, filling every inch of space. Her hands moved so fast they became a blur, but her expression stayed soft and focused. She wasn't showing off. She was releasing everything she had kept inside for years. The sadness of lost chances, the quiet strength of surviving, the fragile beauty of believing again, and then, just as suddenly, the sound began to fade. The melody softened like rain slowing after a storm. Her fingers touched the keys gently one last time, letting the final note linger, trembling in the air like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Silence. Absolute silence. For a moment, no one moved. No one even breathed. It was as if the whole room had forgotten where they were. Then, almost in unison, the crowd began to rise to their feet. The sound of applause filled the air, loud and genuine, echoing off the tall walls. The woman in the silver gown was crying openly now. The older man from the front table clapped so hard his hands turned red. Even the servers lined up along the wall joined in, some smiling, others with tears in their eyes. The young waitress looked up, startled. Her chest rose and fell quickly. She hadn't expected this. She had only wanted to help, to fill the silence until the real pianist arrived. But now the people she had served all evening were looking at her differently, not as a worker, not as a stranger, but as someone who had touched them. The manager hurried forward, a wide, astonished smile on his face. That was... He paused at a loss for words. Incredible, he finally managed to say. You've just turned this whole night around. She gave a small, uncertain smile. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the applause. Guests began to approach her one after another. A woman said, "You have a gift, dear. I've never heard anything so moving." Another man added, "You belong on a stage, not behind a tray." Compliments poured in, but she could barely respond. Her hands were still trembling from the performance, her heart still racing. Someone asked her name, and she hesitated for a moment before softly telling them. She wasn't used to being noticed, much less praised. All her life she had worked quietly, blending into the background. And now, for the first time, all eyes were on her. In the back, the young man from the magazine lowered his phone, smiling. He knew that what he had captured wasn't just a performance, it was a story of courage, of a moment when someone ordinary did something extraordinary. The applause continued, long and heartfelt. Some guests began chanting for an encore, but she shook her head politely, still overwhelmed. The manager guided her off the small stage area, whispering words of gratitude. The rest of the staff watched her pass, clapping softly, pride shining in their eyes. When she finally stepped into the quiet hallway outside the ballroom, she leaned against the wall, her eyes closed. The faint sound of applause still reached her ears. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness, it was relief, maybe even joy. For years she had buried her dream, convincing herself it no longer mattered. But tonight had reminded her that some parts of us never truly fade away. She stayed there for a few moments, letting her heart beat slow. Then she smiled, a small, peaceful smile that came from somewhere deep inside. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. She had finally found the courage to be seen, and it felt like waking up after a long sleep. Inside the ballroom, people were still talking about her. They didn't know her story, not yet, but they knew they had witnessed something rare, something real. In a world full of rehearsed perfection, her sincerity had been a breath of truth, and that truth had moved them all. That night, as the guests began to leave, many turned to look at the piano one last time, as if the memory of her music still lingered there. The hotel manager stood near the entrance, shaking hands with the guests, still amazed by what had just happened. Deep down, he knew that this night, this performance, would be remembered for years. And somewhere in the staff lounge, the young waitress sat quietly with a cup of tea, staring at her trembling hands and smiling softly to herself. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She had spoken through music, and the world had finally listened. The sound of applause still echoed in her ears long after it had faded. Even as she sat quietly in the small staff room, she could still feel the rhythm of her heartbeat trying to match that thunderous sound. Her hands, which had just moments ago danced across the piano keys with such confidence, now trembled slightly as she held her teacup. The warmth from the cup spread into her fingers, grounding her again, reminding her that it had all really happened, that she had actually sat at that grand piano and played in front of all those people. The hotel staff peeked through the door every few minutes, smiling at her like she had just done something heroic. One of the waiters gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder and said, "You were amazing out there." She could only nod, still too overwhelmed to speak. It was hard for her to process how quickly things had changed. Just a few hours earlier, she had been another face in the background, blending into the crowd of servers in black and white uniforms. Now people were asking about her, wanting to know her name, wanting to hear more. When she finally stepped back into the ballroom to help clean up, she noticed that the guests were still talking about her performance. Some were standing by the piano, running their fingers across the keys, whispering about how unexpected and beautiful the moment had been. Others were praising the hotel manager for finding such a hidden gem among his staff. She felt her cheeks grow warm as she listened from afar, not wanting anyone to see her. The hotel manager spotted her and immediately walked over. "There you are," he said, his voice lighter than usual. "You have no idea what you've done tonight. Everyone's been asking about you. I don't even know how to thank you." She smiled shyly and looked down. "I just wanted to help," she said softly. "You helped more than you know," he replied with a smile. "You didn't just save the evening, you made it unforgettable." He told her that a few guests wanted to speak with her before they left. She hesitated, unsure if she could face them. "They just want to thank you," he assured her. They were truly moved. Taking a quiet breath, she nodded. As she approached the small group waiting near the exit, she could feel her heart start to race again. The first to greet her was an elderly man in a dark blue suit. He extended his hand and said, "My dear, that was the most heartfelt performance I've heard in years. I used to work in the music industry and I've met many artists, but what you did tonight was rare." His voice cracked slightly at the end, and she could tell he meant every word. She thanked him politely, her voice still soft but filled with gratitude. Next was a woman in her 50s wearing a silver shawl. She took the waitress's hands gently and said, "Your music reminded me of something I'd forgotten. It touched me in a way I can't explain." Her eyes glistened with tears. The young woman felt her own throat tighten but smiled kindly. "Thank you," she whispered. A few others came forward with warm words, some with tears, some with excited smiles, each one leaving her a little more speechless. For years she had walked these same halls, serving drinks to people who barely looked up to meet her eyes. Tonight they looked at her as if she were someone special. After the last guests had left, the hall grew quiet again. The only sound was the gentle clinking of glasses being cleared and the soft hum of the air conditioning. She looked at the piano one more time. It felt strange. That instrument, so grand and intimidating just hours before, now seemed almost like an old friend. She wanted to touch it again, but she didn't. Instead, she smiled at it and turned away. As she made her way to the locker room to change out of her uniform, she passed by the hotel manager's office. The door was open and he was on the phone. He looked up, waved her in, and gestured for her to wait. She hesitated at the doorway, but he motioned again. When he hung up, he said, "That was the event organizer. They're planning another charity dinner next month and they want you to perform again." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Me?" she asked. "Yes, you," he said, smiling. "And honestly, I think it's time we updated your job title. Maybe not waitress anymore. How does resident pianist sound?" She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Are you serious?" "Completely," he replied. "You've earned it. Besides, I don't think anyone else could play that piano the way you do now." Her heart swelled with gratitude and disbelief. It was more than she had ever hoped for. When she finally left the hotel that night, the air outside was cool and still. The city lights shimmered like scattered stars, and she paused for a moment to take it all in. For the first time in a long time, she felt light. Not because her problems were gone, but because she had found something she thought she had lost forever. Herself. As she walked home through the quiet streets, she kept replaying the night in her mind, the silence before the first note, the way the crowd had gone still, the look on people's faces as they listened. She thought of her parents, especially her father, who had always told her that music wasn't just about sound, it was about feeling. He used to say, "If your heart is in it, people will hear more than notes. They'll hear you." Tonight, she finally understood what he meant. When she reached her small apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her hands. They were still slightly red from the long shift, but to her they felt different now, like they belonged to someone braver. She whispered softly, "Thank you," to the empty room, unsure if she was speaking to her parents, to fate, or to the piano itself. The next morning, she woke up to dozens of messages. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Coworkers congratulating her, friends sending excited emojis, even a few numbers she didn't recognize. Confused, she opened her social media and froze. Someone had posted a video of her performance from the night before. It had already been shared hundreds of times. The caption read, "Waitress stuns elite crowd with unexpected piano performance." Comments poured in beneath it, people praising her talent, calling her inspiring, asking who she was. She scrolled through the comments with wide eyes. There were messages like, "This gave me chills," and "You can feel her heart in every note." She didn't know how to react. It felt unreal, like a dream she might wake up from. Within hours, local news outlets had picked up the story. A reporter even reached out asking for an interview. She laughed nervously, unsure what to say. She wasn't used to attention. All she had wanted that night was to help fill the silence. She hadn't expected it to change everything. Later that afternoon, she went back to the hotel for her next shift. As soon as she walked in, everyone turned to look at her, some clapping, others cheering. Even the head chef came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, and said, "So the star's back, huh?" She blushed and tried to hide her smile. The manager approached with a grin. "Looks like you're famous," he teased. "You ready for all the attention?" She shook her head quickly. "I don't want to be famous," she said softly. "I just want to play." That simple sentence made him smile wider. "Then play," he said, "and let the rest take care of itself." Over the next few days, people began visiting the hotel just to hear her perform. Guests would linger after dinner, waiting for her to sit at the piano. Some even requested songs, though most preferred to let her play whatever came to her heart. Every evening, the same thing happened. The moment she started to play, the noise of the world faded away, replaced by that same hush of wonder she had created the first time. But despite the growing attention, she stayed humble. She still helped the staff when things got busy, still smiled kindly at the guests, still took her tea breaks in the small staff room. What changed was the way people looked at her, not as a server, but as someone who had found her gift again and had the courage to share it. One evening, as she finished her last song of the night, she looked out at the small crowd gathered around the piano. There were hotel guests, a few regulars, and even some of her coworkers sitting quietly. When she finished, they applauded warmly. She stood up, bowed her head slightly, and smiled. For her, That simple applause meant more than anything else. After the guest left, she sat alone at the piano for a while, running her fingers gently over the keys. She didn't play, not yet. She just sat there, feeling the stillness of the empty room. She thought about how much had changed in such a short time, how one small moment of courage had turned her life in a new direction. Before leaving, she whispered softly to the piano, "Thank you for waiting for me." It sounded silly, but she meant it. She believed that some dreams never really die. They just wait quietly until you're ready to bring them back to life. Outside, the night was peaceful. The moonlight shimmered across the street and she breathed in the cool air. She didn't know where this journey would lead, but she knew it was only the beginning. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. She had already faced her biggest fear, being seen, and had discovered something beautiful on the other side. She walked home slowly, her steps light, her heart full. The city buzzed around her, but inside she carried a quiet song, one that no one could take away. It was the sound of hope, of courage, of rediscovery, and she knew deep down that she would never stop playing again. The days that followed felt like something out of a dream. Everything changed so quickly that sometimes she had to stop and remind herself that it was all real. The same hotel where she once quietly moved between tables now carried her music through its halls every evening. The guests still came for their fine dinners and gatherings, but now they also came to hear her. People asked the staff when she would play, and the hotel even printed small cards with her performance times. The first evening she saw those cards, she laughed in disbelief. Her name, printed so neatly in gold letters, felt almost unreal. She had never imagined it would appear anywhere other than a name tag pinned to her uniform. The hotel manager told her that the bookings had doubled since her video went viral. "You've become our lucky charm," he said jokingly one afternoon, but she could see he meant it kindly. She didn't see herself as anything special. Every night before playing, she still felt the same flutter in her chest, the same humble nervousness she had felt that first time. But when her fingers touched the piano keys, all the noise in her mind went quiet. It was as if every note she played pulled her closer to the person she had once been, the girl who loved music before life got complicated. One evening, as she played softly in the candlelit hall, she noticed something she hadn't before. People weren't just listening, they were feeling. Some smiled quietly, some closed their eyes, and some simply sat still, letting the music carry them away. Watching them, she realized that maybe music wasn't about fame or recognition at all. Maybe it was about giving people something they didn't even know they needed. After her performance, she usually stayed back for a few minutes to help the other staff. She didn't want them to think she was above them now just because people clapped for her. She still rolled up her sleeves and carried trays, still shared jokes in the kitchen, still thanked everyone before going home. The others respected her even more for it. One night, after finishing a set, she was sitting near the bar sipping her tea when a man approached her. He looked about 50, wearing a simple suit and glasses. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I don't mean to bother you. I just wanted to say that your music reminded me of my daughter. She used to play like that before we lost her." His voice cracked at the end, and for a second neither of them spoke. She put down her cup and said gently, "I'm so sorry." He nodded and smiled faintly. "Don't be. It's strange, but hearing you tonight felt like hearing her again." "Thank you for that," she smiled, touched deeply by his words. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. After he left, she sat there for a long time, staring at the piano. She realized that her music was reaching people in ways she never expected, not just as sound, but as comfort, as connection. Over the next few weeks, more people came to hear her play. A few local musicians even stopped by, curious about the waitress-turned-pianist whose video had touched so many hearts online. Some invited her to small gatherings and open mic nights around the city. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't sure she belonged anywhere outside that hotel hall, but the manager encouraged her. "You should share your gift," he said one day. "The world could use more of what you have." So she started saying yes. Her first small public performance outside the hotel was at a cozy cafe downtown. It wasn't fancy, just a few tables, warm lights, and a slightly out-of-tune piano. But as soon as she began playing, the chatter in the cafe softened. People turned their heads, some putting down their coffee cups mid-sip. She played from her heart, letting the melody tell her story once again. When she finished, the cafe erupted in applause, and the owner immediately asked her to come back any time. Word began to spread even more. A local newspaper wrote an article about her, calling her the waitress who played her way into people's hearts. When she saw the headline, she laughed and shook her head. "I'm just someone who loves to play," she said when a reporter asked for a quote. But deep down, she couldn't help feeling proud, not because of the fame, but because she had found a way back to what she truly loved. Despite her growing popularity, she stayed the same kind, humble person everyone knew. She always took time to thank the hotel manager for giving her a chance that night, always greeted the cleaning staff with a smile, always helped when she could. She knew where she came from, and she never wanted to forget it. One afternoon, she received an envelope at the hotel reception. It was thick and neatly sealed. When she opened it, she found a letter and a ticket to a prestigious music festival in another city. The letter was from one of the guests who had attended that charity dinner weeks ago, the elderly man who had first approached her after her performance. He wrote that he was on the festival's board and that they wanted her to perform as a guest pianist. "You deserve to be heard by the world," he wrote. "You reminded me why music matters." She read the letter 3 times before she believed it. She showed it to the hotel manager, who grinned from ear to ear. "This is your moment," he said proudly. "You have to go." When the night of the festival finally arrived, she stood backstage, her heart thudding in her chest. The stage was massive, the hall filled with hundreds of people, far more than the hotel ballroom. She could hear the faint hum of the audience talking, waiting. For a brief moment, fear crept in. What if she wasn't good enough? What if this time they didn't feel what the others had felt? But then she remembered that night at the hotel. The trembling start. The quiet crowd. The moment when she had closed her eyes and just played. That was all she had to do again. Just play, just be honest, just let the music speak for her. When she stepped onto the stage, the lights were bright, and the piano gleamed like a mirror. She took a deep breath, sat down, and let her fingers find the first notes. The hall fell silent. The music began softly, slowly, almost shyly, just like her first performance. Then it grew, lifting higher and deeper, her confidence building with every note. By the time she reached the final part of her piece, the audience was completely still. She didn't need to look up to know they were listening with their hearts. The last note lingered, trembling in the air like a whisper that didn't want to end. And then came the applause, thunderous, heartfelt, endless. She looked up and tears filled her eyes. For the second time in her life, a room full of strangers stood for her. But this time she wasn't just a waitress who surprised a crowd. She was a musician who had found her place again. After the show, people came backstage to meet her. Musicians, journalists, and fans, but she stayed as humble as ever. She thanked them all softly, smiling the same gentle smile that had once brightened the hotel dining room. When she returned home a few days later, she went straight to the hotel before even unpacking. The staff greeted her with hugs and cheers. "Our star is back," someone shouted. She laughed, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I missed you all," she said sincerely. That evening, she sat once more at her familiar piano in the hotel hall. The soft golden lights glowed above her as she began to play again, just as she always had. The guests didn't know that she had just performed in one of the biggest halls in the country, and she didn't tell them. To her, this piano, this place, still meant the most. It was where everything had begun. As the final notes drifted through the room, she looked around at the smiling faces, the people quietly moved by her music. She realized something important. Success wasn't about where you performed, but how honestly you did it. She didn't need to chase fame. She only needed to keep playing from her heart. Later that night, after everyone had gone, she stayed behind alone. The hall was quiet, the city lights twinkling through the tall windows. She touched the piano keys one more time, softly, almost like saying goodbye to an old friend. Then she whispered, "Thank you for giving me another chance." She stood up, walked toward the door, and paused for a moment, looking back. That same warmth she had felt the first night returned to her chest, the quiet, powerful feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Outside, the wind blew gently, carrying the faint echo of her music through the streets. Somewhere out there, people were still sharing her story. The story of a quiet waitress who once stepped up to a piano and reminded the world what it meant to feel something real. And though her journey was far from over, she knew one thing for sure. No matter where life took her, she would never stop playing, because music wasn't just what she did, and it was who she was.